Welcome back, everybody. I know it's been a while, kind of been MIA, gone in the wind, but Leading Out is back, and we're here with a fun bite-sized edition. We did one of these a while ago, talking about Absolute Batman, and now we're back. Um, you know me, it's me, Cybershine 3, and I'm here with a returning guest. It's Cheesy. Cheesy's back, baby.
Give me money.
Eventually. Um, we got a fun one for you. Um, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think it's safe to say you kind of like Grant Morrison,
I
kind
do.
of.
I've done a ritual in my free time to summon them.
Yeah, and I happen to quite like Morrison as well. I would rank them at least top five, maybe top three for writers.
Hmm.
So this bite size is going to be all about the bald wizard themselves. We're going to talk about books we like from them, maybe some wild card books that we don't like from the Morrison, um, and just about thoughts and feelings with them since we got a lot. Do you have a particular book you wanted to start with?
Not really. I'm good with whatever.
So I think, let's dial it back a little bit. The first Grant Morrison book I ever read all the way through. Well, not all the way through. Okay, I should be more specific. The first Grant Morrison comic that I ever read front to back, my dad had a copy of Invisible's number one. Um, and when I was a kid, he had more comics to be clear. Um, but when I was a kid, I was allowed to read stuff from his shelf. And I one day I picked up Invisible's number one because if you haven't seen the cover, it's kind of insane. It's just like a grenade, but like Technicolor. It's like a rainbow grenade, and I was like, "That's crazy! Like, what's going on there?" And then I read it, and I remember thinking, "I'm like, is this even in English?" Like, I put it, I closed, I finished that issue, and it was really the first time I was like, I understand all the words on the page, but I don't know if I necessarily understand what's going on. But I liked it. I liked that feeling. And I brought it up to my dad. I was like, oh, yeah, I read that. And he was like, oh, yeah, that's Grant Morrison. I love Grant Morrison stuff. Um, and so then the next day I went to the library and I picked out um, A Serious House and Serious Earth. And I've been here ever since. Um, God, we could talk about those books, either of those books, for hours. Um,
I mean, Serious House I think could be its own episode because there's just so much context to everything in the script of it. Like it took me a good 2 hours to just read through the entire script because it's so dense and just insightful.
I think it's also interesting. Morrison, I think we'll probably reference back to this several times in different books. Morrison is such a continuity junkie. They love their research and learning about these different characters. So what makes Arkham Asylum so interesting as like a book, right? Is that
Yeah,
like in a lot of ways it was like a culmination of like everything we knew about Arkham before, but it also really defined like when you think of Arkham Asylum, you're thinking about the one that debuted in Serious House and Serious Earth. Arkham Asylum didn't like look like that. It didn't feel like that before that book. And that book
yeah.
really like put into terms what that location is. And I think that's so interesting because the rest of the story is pretty like separate. I would say like the majority of the story is kind of its own self-contained. Like it could be in continuity, but it makes more sense as like an out of continuity thing. but like the vision of Arkham is this like dilapidated, like this like living building that really only starts with Morrison.
Yeah, like I like the I believe it was either Jerry Dugan or Stan Slotman, the Arkham Asylum Living Hell. That title of that book just kind of summarizes what I think
Yeah,
Arkham should be seen as. It's an alright, utterly damned, eternally cursed. John Constantine couldn't fix him with 5 exorcisms, building ripped from hell itself, in my opinion. You
yeah,
can't really it can't be fixed, in my opinion. It has to be damned and ridden with the blood and sins of countless psychopaths and monsters to really be a thing that can exist.
and I think it's just so interesting that we really like there wasn't any concept of that, before this book, and now it's like so integral, especially because I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not terribly old. I could pull up the date, but I want to say it's only a couple odd years ago. Let's see. Serious House. Batman Arkham. Una casa seria su una terraceria. I've never seen the Spanish title before. Uh, I gotta scroll past all those one shots they did, like Batman Arkham, Mr. Freeze, and
Oh yeah, those are a mess to try and to find out if you're looking for stuff on Google. I don't
well,
like how they named those.
because here's what else, it, the book's kind of in a weird spot, right? Where it's like, yeah, 1989. Like that's not. I know that seems long ago now, but like in the grand scheme of things, that's not terribly,
Yeah,
old. And it's like now Arkham is so integral. Like you can do the Batman story now without being like, and here's what's going on with Arkham. And it's just so interesting because it didn't really exist before. And then, yeah, you were kind of getting into it, but it's like, it's such a layered book. There's so much going on. Um, I always come back to the thing with Two Face, like the idea of giving him different ways to, like make more decisions and how that
yeah.
ultimately just made him worse.
I loved Morris's annotations on that part of the script so much. Um,
Do you have them pulled up?
I'm looking. I'm looking at the book right now. Tweedledee
Yeah.
begin Tweedledum. I think it's next. I went too far, but okay. I can speak while I look. But it's yeah. I like how it also kind of puts into perspective how psychology on a surface level is helpful, but if you get self-righteous enough, you're honestly worse than the
Mhm.
mentally unwell. That's kind of what I think Morrison was trying to achieve um, with what happened to Two-Face.
Well, especially like, I feel like at the book's end with the whole conversation with Joker about like, oh, I'd rather stay in here in the asylum than go into the world, and like that's where the real crazies are, is outside the
Mm-hmm.
walls. It's like it's a topic that Morrison will come back to a couple times in their writing, but like there is something to be said about like how, you know, is it other people who are making the inmates at Arkham worse, right? Is it like, um, i- would isolation be better, or that sort of thing? And the fact that, another thing that people love referencing from this book, the fact that it's like Batman should probably also get help too. Like Batman's just as, at least in this telling, it's like Batman's just as crazy as his foes. And I think that's a subject that has led to a lot of really interesting stories that, again, I don't really think was an idea before. Like, I can't really think of any other storyline. I guess maybe Dark Knight Returns. Maybe you could kind of throw that in there. But like
Yeah,
this real idea of like, oh, maybe we're not so different. That like that's totally Serious House. That's always that all comes back to Serious House.
yeah. Like I remember, like the biggest line that really stuck with me, um, it in Serious House was what Joker said to Batman, but when he was leaving the asylum. Just don't forget, if it ever gets too tough, there's always a place for you here.
Yeah, like I think it kind of gets what you were talking about to like the damned nature of Gotham. I think Morrison's really obsessed with the sort of like fate aspect of Batman as a character. You
Absolutely.
kind of you kind of see this in their runs both on Batman and Batman Inc. Like there's almost like a cursed nature to the Batman role. It's like something that haunts you and other people in that orbit. Um,
Mm,
and I think it's really interesting because again, like Morrison does their homework. There's definitely been seeds of that prior. I think you read a lot of like the classic Danny O'Neill stuff and like the way he frames sort of Bruce's story. You see that too. But I think again, what Morrison does so well is like taking that homework, taking that like, okay, well, let's look back at what's come before, but let's evolve it. Let's do something new. Let's do something like let's say something about these characters. Um, I think that's definitely a topic we're going to keep seeing coming up, especially if we do other license or big two Morrison titles.
yeah. From my experience having read Serious House and Morrison's entire run on Batman, I think they really see Bruce's becoming of Batman and the psychological strain that he got from, seeing his parents gunned down in Crime Alley. And I think a part of that whole night people tend to forget is that Bruce was very happy in those leading moments after watching the Mark of Zorro.
Yeah,
So it
Ben
wasn't
Ida.
just the trauma of his parents being shot, it was also this immediate this seizure of his God, the fucking chemical. The happiness of his being in those
Yeah,
moments. Like I think that's part of what Bruce used to channel the being of Batman. He used his trauma to really focus in on being serious, keeping this straight demeanor to just getting the job done. Because we know that he relives at night every day with how he created the her in
yeah.
our personality with Sorrow and Arkham, which is still the most genius thing in history of writing, in my opinion. Um, you just see this the deepness that this moment had on Bruce's psychology. There's this sort of permanence to it.
Morrison talks about this idea, and for anyone who hasn't, I highly recommend. Morrison put out a book. I want to say in like 2007. It's called Super Gods. It's basically them going through a bunch of classic origins and kind of talking about like their philosophy um, about superheroes as modern mythology. It's a great book. Um, But one thing that they talk about a lot in that book, like there's a whole chapter dedicated to it, is sort of the weight of the origin story, right? And the importance of the origin story, um, and how that kind of relates to how mythology, you know, you think of a particular god or goddess, and there's usually like the main story that's connected to them. And Morrison kind of argues like that's what the origin story is for a superhero. Even if you haven't read ASM 15, or not ASM, if you haven't read Amazing Fantasy
Yeah, I see.
15, you know how uh, Uncle Ben got gunned down, and you know what happened. And it's the same thing where like maybe every ancient Greek hadn't read, the Odyssey or whatever, but they knew that Odysseus and Athena. So that's kind of what they're arguing. And I think you really see that with like Batman, where so much of Morrison's, vision of Batman really does come back to that moment, to the gun, to the alley. And I think it's so interesting because we kind of joke about it, right? It's like, oh, every Batman movie starts with his parents getting shot. But like simultaneously, it often does seem like in Batman media, it's not given the appropriate weight just because, like, you look at the way Morrison writes it, he is so, like, stuck in it, right? And I feel like you compare that to, like, Christian Bale's portrayal of the character, and he doesn't seem to be as so stuck in that night. Actually, it's one of the things I really enjoyed about Robert Pattinson's portrayal in the Batman, and I think he even mentioned having read um, Arkham for that film. But it's like in Morrison's world, like you're right. Like the Bruce experiences that night in Crime Alley like every day, and the shadow that is Batman is consumed in that as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, like Morrison really likes to get into the head of the not just the
Mm,
hero, but the being. Like in Serious House with Batman's psychotherapy scene and that.
yeah, when they're doing the assessment.
Yeah, and afterwards with him putting the shard of glass to his hand, and part of this that Morrison annotated that part of that script and said that initially it was gonna be this little like piece, just little shard, like they have on a necklace, and that it was Dave McKean who made that giant shard that in reality would have completely severed every nerve in Bruce's hand. It made him down a hand for the rest of his life.
Hmm.
And you can tell how genuinely pissed off Morrison was annotating that part of the script because they they need this psychological boundary to Batman. Like he's horrendously unwell. Like more part of Batman's
Yeah, that's
basis
a good way
in
of putting
Arkham
it. Yeah, well.
Asylum, like literally Morrison's sort of inspiration for writing Batman in that book, alongside the seriousness that he started to come into, was that he was just a sexless man in that book. He was very just. I think it's almost the most autistic Batman has ever been written. He's just very hyper emotive and reactive and very just disconnected from a lot of things, in my opinion.
Hmm. No, I like that word you used, unwell. I think that's really the best way to put it because it's like, and Morrison really emphasizes this too. He's fairly competent. Like he's functional, right? But uh, you know, trained in all these martial arts and a cunning detective, able to put pieces together. So it's not that like he's like I feel like Morrison. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but like I don't think they'd ever describe Batman as like broken in the sense of like he can't function. It's more that like because of this hang up with his parents, like he's almost like limiting himself. He could be better, but he's sick. He is unwell, and in that way,
Yeah.
it's kind of like holding him back in a sense.
Yeah, I agree with your sentiment on that. Morrison absolutely believes that Bruce is just unwell and just so deeply scarred, not only his childhood trauma, but just what he's experienced as Batman,
Yeah,
the countless bodies he's had to see, the endless fights he had against Joker, the death of Jason, just so much of it. Because even like in the beginning of Morrison's run on Batman, it's Bruce deciding to be Bruce Wayne for once and meeting Jezebel Dredd and all. Like
right.
Morrison does not see this disconnect in Batman's humanity. They see this sort of tremor within it. And I think part of that demonstrates that well is how Bruce's experience is handled in the second part of the run, where people question it, but he's already such a reclusive man that his apparent death kind of goes unnoticed. Like, sure, Damien very funnily started to become CEO for a while of Enterprises, but
Right.
nobody is calling wellness checks or anything like that to see if Bruce is all right because maybe this is likely. They probably thought that he just went on a real bad bender or he went on a sabbatical or you know maybe he just found love and decided to focus on that.
I think it's an interesting comparison to what you see Morrison do. Not to jump ahead, but like what you see them do with Clark, whether it's in All Star or Action Comics. I think a lot of Morrison's Batman is defined by his isolation,
Yeah,
whereas Morrison's Clark is defined by his community and his friendship, um, and how connected to other people he is. So it makes such an interesting comparison. Um, I really just want to jump the gun and start talking about All Star Superman. That's all I'm thinking. Like, I love that book so much. Um, but I do want to say though, before we jump away from Batman, um, I think it's really interesting that Morrison is the one that introduces Damien. Um, you know, eh, there's such an eclectic writer. I can't really say like, oh, this doesn't feel like a Morrison character because like there are so many Morrison characters. So I wouldn't say that like Damien doesn't feel like a Morrison character, but it's interesting to me because I don't know, Damien feels like an outsider in his own book, and I think that's on purpose, right? Because that's both like textual and literally like he's a new character, but he's also new in this world. Um, and that's one of the many things I would love to pick if I had like 20 minutes with Grant. That's what I'd call it, my 20 minutes with Grant. Um, I would love to poke their brain more about Damien because I think Damien now has become a very like full character. Um, but I can imagine how at the time like being like I want to introduce a biological son for Batman. Like, oh my god, I can't believe editorial was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. I mean, it's funny now because we got so many kids running around, but at the time, I imagine that was
yeah. I
controversial.
mean, Damien was only like 9 years old
Well,
when he
that's
was
part of it too.
introduced.
He's so young, yeah,
Like
and so
I,
it makes
this
the whole
goes
like the moral conflict with the Robins more interesting. It's like you're bringing like actual kids.
well. I think Morrison kind of uses this as a reflection. Bruce adopted Dick and Jason and Tim, and he let them become these soldiers of their own choice, really. Like, and I like to imagine that Bruce didn't make Dick become Robin for a few years after adopting him.
Hmm.
And you compare that to Damien, who kind of thrust himself into that becoming of Robin, and you see the psychological impact that had on Tim Drake. Like, I know everyone loves to slander Tim, but I think what he went through through Morrison's run through Batman Reborn, all that, I think everything he went through was some of the best character work in Batman's entire mythos.
Hmm. No, that's
Like,
the thing. The thing, right, is the how defining. No matter how limited, Morrison got quite a bit of time with Batman, but even like shorter characters, like I'm sure we'll talk about it when we get to like Seven Soldiers or whatever. But it's like you give Morrison any time with a character, and they're redefined. Like that becomes the character.
yeah, like I'm looking over my Morrison books right now, and with Batman, I mean, Morrison redefined Bruce Wayne in this
Hmm.
more just psychological sense. Like Batman by Grant Morrison, um, wasn't more so about the character as it was the inner self and being of the character. Every part of Batman that Morrison has ever written takes a psychological viewpoint from a different angle between the three sections of other Batman run, between Arkham Asylum, between JLA, and the parts that they minorly wrote for Batman and stuff like Final Crisis or 52.
Right.
It's always a new standpoint between Bruce's shock of having a child, having to deal with this, you know, person that was raised to kill, being his own child, and was there an R with him, with having to Dick, with him having to become Batman during Batman Reborn, how that affected him. It's the psychology of Batman as the concept, or with Batman Incorporated, showing Batman isn't a single being; it's a worldwide concept. Or with JLA, where Batman was described as Hades, and Morrison's sort of pantheon there, with him
Hmm.
wanting to be more connected to Earth instead of the Watchtower. And you just see that Morrison has a very staunch and acute idea of what Batman psychology should be in such a seven-dimensional way compared to any other writer, say me, Denny O'Neil or Frank Miller.
Absolutely. Okay, I think
Um,
for the sake of time, we do have to move on from Batman. But needless to say, I mean, between Serious House and the Batman and Robin, Batman Inc. I mean, talk about redefining. I mean, I didn't even really get into it, but like Grant Morrison's also the one who has the balls to be like, you know what? Bruce is kind of boring. Let's let somebody else be Batman for a bit. I love Batman and Robin. That book is incredible. Like Dick taking over, bringing like an almost like Spider-Man kind of quippy charm. The flying cars, super fun. Professor Pig is a cool villain. Flamingo. God, okay. I was like, oh, we gotta move on for sake of time, and then I brought up more stuff. Um, do we go? You know what? Let's go for the juxtaposition. Let's talk about their Superman stuff. Um, Now I've read All Star, and I've also read Superman and the Authority. But you've read their action run, which I read the first issue of and I quite liked. I just haven't finished it. But did you want to talk more about that? Because I know you quite enjoy it.
yeah, so how I came into reading action comics, it was about a year ago, probably 10 months ago.
Hmm.
My friend is a really big Superman fan, and he was like, hey, you should really read Action Comics for Grant Morrison. It's a fresh slate with New 52. And it's just this really genius run, and it's really kind of an underappreciated Morrison book when you put it up against Doom Patrol and Animal Man, Chrono
Hmm.
Crisis, Batman, JLA, All Star, which overshadows Action Comics, and it's really just a genius book. Like, it is one of the few books that I have reread because you just notice so much more happens. Like, I didn't really like it at first. I think I gave most of the issues a 3 or 3.5 on League at first. But then I gave myself the time to reread things, and I realized Morrison was a genuine genius with this book. The entire run is, I'm not going to spoil it a ton, it's all a trick. You have to read it if you want to understand what that means more, but it's everything that happened in the run happened with true and genuine meaning.
Right. Well, and I think again, this is all just from my perspective on the first issue. I think this dares the reader to kind of reinterpret what Superman represents to them. Like for first and foremost, you get that costume, right? Like with the
Yeah.
jeans and the shirt, and you're like, wait a minute, that's not what Superman looks like. But then, like, I guess this is more credit to the artist than anything. But like the way Clark is drawn in that book, I think is so interesting because he's doing all the Superman stuff, but he looks like a normal guy, and in a way that really harkens back to this original like Man of the People hero that Siegel and Schuster were going for. Um, and I like it. I like it a lot. Clark's Clark's a character that can deal with world-ending cataclysms and stuff, but like the small threats of that book, I think are so interesting. Whether it's General Lane or just even like people trying to find out his identity, like with the news and stuff.
Yes, besides the book being a whole trip, my favorite part of Action Comics, spoil territory, skip ahead, I don't know, 5 hours
It's good.
before, if you don't want to hear spoilers. My favorite part of Action Comics was that Clark died.
Yes.
And I think the work Morrison did with the death of Clark Kent specifically is unrivaled. Like, a psychologist truly wishes they could do the same thing that Morrison did with Clark. With him realizing. Also, harkens back to, remember a scene from Superman the Animated Series where Mixie entered Clark's identity, and he was like, okay, I'll make a new one. Morrison really understands that Superman is the main person. Clark Kent is a secret identity through it all.
Right. Well, and again,
Right.
like not to keep bringing up Batman, but it's like I think that's another parallel between the two that Grant Morrison really helped define, right? When we talk about like this whole, well, Batman's the real person and Bruce Wayne is the persona. It's like, you get a lot of that in Morrison's run, but then you get what you said in Action. And I also think especially in All-Star, right, is that it's like there isn't really a mask in the same way that there is with Batman when it comes to
Yeah.
Superman. You're really getting him. You're getting Clark, even when he's flying around.
Another part of the run that really stuck with me was number 0. A lot of the number 0s to New 52 were kind of a mandate to
Most of them are pretty decent, though. Yeah, I agree.
yeah, like I mean, it was a mandate regardless, but a lot of them, yeah, pretty solid from the few I've read. Like I think the JLD number zero from the video two was my highest rated issue of the run. But going back after comics, the story in number zero about the boy who stole Superman's cape. There are a few issues in a comic book that can give me chills. But what happened in number zero is just so beautiful. Was Superman being knocked out by this big RPG, this kid coming across his cape and taking it. And he goes back to his abusive household with this alcoholic father who beats his wife and children. And here comes his one son wearing the cape. The father, God forbid, tries to stab the kid, and the knife breaks it under the cape. And then he punches the father. He keels over and he goes to his brother and he says, "If you wear this cape, nothing can hurt." And it's just so beautiful because you see him coming up um on the kids, and then there's this train coming, and then there's Clark. He stops the train, he saves the day, and it isn't shown, but he likely instilled this sort of recognition into the father.
Hmm.
The oppressed have a champion now. The abusers and the murderers and the scum of Metropolis are no longer safe.
And the
Like,
fact that it's not through fear, right? It's like Superman, more than any other writer, I think Morrison really gets that whole Superman is hope thing, right? Like hope that you can change, hope that you can make a better tomorrow. And I think
yes,
you see that in that story. I think you see that especially in All Star. The fact that he's actively dying and is like, no, but I'm still going to help people out. I'm still going to be a good person and like use my power to help people. It's like, I don't think any other writer really taps into that in that same way, with maybe the exception. I've always felt Mark Waid hits similar beats, but then again, they're close collaborators, so I wouldn't be surprised if
I
there's a
mean,
little
I mean, I think
back
a
and
Wade
forth.
Morrison Superman book would probably just be the best Superman story ever.
Oh, easily, yeah, easily. If they, I mean, like it's so brief, but I think it's what you see. Um, have you gotten to the part in 52 where they have the big superhero meeting and Clark has to be there in disguise because he's losing his powers? You
I
know what I'm talking
don't think so.
about? Okay,
My latest
then I
issue
won't
was
get into it.
the JSA issue with
Oh yeah,
Obsidian and the breakdown. I think they're probably still a few weeks out from that.
well, I don't want to spoil it too much, but like even though 52, it's kind of the whole point that the Trinity is in it. I think one of the things that really shines through while you're reading it is like how much those authors have such like respect and reverence for the Trinity as characters.
Yeah,
And I think with Morrison and Superman, you really get down to this thing. I'm going to keep referencing Super Gods just because it's very easy to get their opinion on stuff. But like the way Morrison talks about Superman in that book, I think is so interesting. Morrison likens Superman to like Horus and like other, all these cultures have like sun deities, right? They always have
yeah,
this guy who has powers with the sun. And the way like Grant Morrison puts it is that it's like when you see the sun rising in the morning in the next day, it gives you that hope that you're like, yeah, I beat the night and I'm ready to like keep moving forward. And that's the same effect Superman should have, right? You should see Superman flying in the sky and be like, yeah, I can keep going, like I can keep persevering. And I think that really does come through in all of their stuff. I mean, I think it's what's so interesting about. Um, I know you haven't gotten to it, but if people haven't, Superman and the Authority is one of the most interesting Morrison books I've read because it really taps into that. You know, you have an older Superman. He's kind of losing his powers, and he's decided to recruit a team kind of made up of oddballs. And I mean, friggin' Manchester Black's on there, so you know we're kind of in some serious shit. But like even then, like when Clark is actively like, I don't have the power anymore to like make you act in line, but I hope that I've shown you that my way is good and that you believe in me and you believe in my cause enough that I don't have to like threaten you with violence anymore. Like you just recognize the work that I've done and you can respect that. And it's written so well. I love that book. The fact that it's only like 4 issues, but it just tells such a complete story. That's something I should have brought up earlier. Just good at like limits, you know, like the going back to the Serious House real quick. It's just one like graphic novel. Like I think it's only what like 75 pages. It's not very.
I think it's 85.
Yeah, they're so good at working in spaces. Whatever space Morrison is given, I think they always excel at it. Um, and you know, you see that with Seven Soldiers with like the mini format. You see that with oh, what was the other book I was gonna? Well, even like Animal Man, kind of, because Animal Man
Yeah.
was originally gonna just be that first, I think six issue arc. Like
No,
it
it
was
was
just
4 issues. It was just gonna be the Human Zoo.
yeah, yeah, it was just gonna be Human Zoo, and they were like, okay, I have something that I want to say, and I'm gonna use that 4 issues to tell what I want. And then when they were given the opportunity to expand, they were ready, right? And they immediately hit the ground running and start telling that
Oh,
next story.
I mean, yeah, but with Coyote Gospel, imagine seeing this miniseries for this absolute no name, thinking, "Oh, this is pretty good," and then the next issue that happened after it was announced to become an ongoing was about God and the cruelty of omnipotence. It's just more like most people when they come into a new position like that, being a new writer, being a manager, a CEO, whatever, they feel this need to prove themselves. And I mean, it happens where they think like, "I work at a grocery store, and the deli just got new managers, and they're already stuck up because they want to prove themselves."
Right.
Morrison didn't need to prove anything because they knew just needed to tell people to just kind of focus on the world more. Like in Animal Man number 26, Morrison tells you, like support PETA. This is before PETA became, you know,
Yeah. This is
a
it.
pile of
This is when
shit.
Peter was still yeah, cool.
But Morrison was like, hey, I care about animals. I don't were they a vegan or vegetarian? Are
Well,
they?
because that's where you get the great line when massive spoilers for Animal Man. Massive spoilers. Please skip ahead if you have not read Animal Man. Massive spoilers. When you get to that final issue of the run, right? And Buddy meets Grant, like the character of Grant Morrison, and Grant Morrison says like, "Well, I made you a vegetarian because I was a vegetarian and I didn't know how else to write you." And it's that surreal line of like, where does the line between the character that you're creating, like where's the separation, right, between author and character? And Morrison loves playing with that. You know, you see that in Invisibles with
With King Mob.
yeah, with King Mob. Thank you. I was drawing a blank. Um, but I think Animal Man. Yeah, I'm biased. I like it because it's probably my favorite Morrison book. But like the way they do it in Animal Man is just so interesting. You know, you have that chapter where or you have that issue where he goes to like the world of all the forgotten characters, like with the inferior five and stuff, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
"What did we do like? What did we do to be abandoned by our creators? We're just a reflection of our creators. Like, are they abandoning themselves?" And it's like, who else was asking that back in the '80s? Like, no other author was thinking, at least in comic books, because that's what I'll say this. People talk a lot about like the transition from comics as disposable media to like artistic media, right? And I think it really does happen with this British invasion of the late '80s, because Morrison really does approach comics like novel work, I think, more than prior writers. It's like these are characters that I'm going to spend time with, not just the week or two that I'm writing the issue. I'm thinking about these characters when I'm going to the store or when or when I'm going to bed. Like that's the level of connection between artist and creator that they're
Yeah.
promoting.
That's just, I think, one of the best things with Morrison is that they never write to write. They write to tell, to announce,
Yeah,
even.
there's a purpose. Yes. There's always like a direction. And I think that's even where sometimes stuff that like people are like, I'm not so sure about that. Like I think that's where a lot of it comes from. Um, there was that I didn't read all of it, but there was that Green Lantern book they did a couple years ago. I remember if it had a subtitle. Let's see. Anyway, the point that I was getting at is that it was like you're like, oh, Grant Morrison on Green Lantern, like why is that happening? And it's this really interesting, like, Hal sort of meditating on what issue is this one? No, anyway, it's like this. It's focused on like Hal being, like, oh, like we're supposed to be like the enforcers of the galaxy, and like what right does that give us? Are we entitled to that? And it's like I love books with purpose, and every single Morrison book, like even if they love the character, they've talked about it with like Superman. Like they're always so giddy to write Superman because they just really like Superman, but they're never just writing Superman to be like, oh, look at this guy, look at how cool Superman is. Like there's still a direction, and I
Yeah.
respect that because I feel like you read some other people's work. I'll be honest, like I throw Jeff Johns under this bus a lot. Sometimes you read a Jeff Johns book and you're like, I don't think you have anything to say. You just really like this character and you want to make them look cool for 26 pages. That's
Yeah.
fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's better what Morrison does. I think it's objectively more interesting.
It is, yeah.
But then that's so funny when you get to like stuff like Invisibles or I would kind of okay. This is my kind of controversial take. With the amount of work Grant Morrison did with Doom Patrol, I consider those basically original characters. Like, yeah, they have the continuity and the history of the prior characters, but like, especially with like Rebus and like Cliff, like those are Morrison's babies now.
Yeah, I mean, Morrison likes to reinvent. Like, I mean, Animal Man, he,
I see
Morrison's
that point.
character
Yeah.
that they wrote in that run is still the character that's written today.
Hmm.
There were about 45 more issues or 50 more issues in the original run. And then there was also the Jeff Lemire run. And across those books, all of that has been ignored.
Yeah, basically.
Everyone still aims to write the character Morrison wrote. Like the continuity with those other books is still present. Like Buddy was in Justice League Dark for 2 issue arc, and he was wearing the same suit from the New 52 Death of the Muir run. Like there's still things from those other runs that are present, but it's still not the character that Lemire written, or that Peter Milligan wrote, that Tom Veitch wrote, or um Damon Delano, any of these people wrote. It's only Morrison's character.
The way they redefine a character, I think, and the lasting effect of it. We were kind of getting into it with Batman, right? It's like the
Yeah,
way, like, you're right. It's like Morrison's run ended 40, almost 50 years ago, which is insane to think about. Um, and yet that's still Buddy Baker. When people talk about Buddy Baker, they're talking about um, Morrison's interpretation, but
yeah,
also the fact that it's like, because then you do get to like Morrison original characters, like completely created by them. Like, you could write the best Crazy Jane book ever right now. You could do like a 6 issue. You could do like Man with the equivalent of like Man Without Fear, but for Crazy Jane, and people will still, like, it could be flawless, and they would still think about Morrison's Crazy Jane, because especially when they create a character, there's something wholly unique about it, right? There's something like
yeah,
so unlike anything else in the zeitgeist when they do it. I think about it the same way I do with like Cassandra No, or what's another random Morrison OC? Damien, right? It's like I feel like Damien's like one of the best examples with that. It's like there's not been a Robin like Damian Wayne before, and there's never going to be one after.
yeah. Never.
Sorry, Duke Thomas. Sorry you had to follow up somebody too cool for school.
But yeah, there's always something special to the things Morrison creates. Like with the JLA run
Hmm.
with Zario, who else would have had this idea for a fallen angel, an angel who willingly fell nonetheless, with his willpower fueled sword that is aura farms, but is still an actual character? Or with Mageddon being the sort of existential destruction that could even destroy the hope that Superman embodies. Like Morrison always just has these outlandish, in a good way, outlandish ideas with the characters they create, and they pretty much almost always land perfectly fee first.
I come back to, for me, I always come back to how he, when Morrison is given a character, I feel like they're often very aware of like the potential of them,
Yeah,
and they like to take that and be like, okay, where can we take this? This character has potential. What are we doing with that? Where are we going? You know, um, what was an example? Like, I think about the provocativeness of introducing like Dust in New X-Men, right? It's like, we've just suffered the 9/11 terrorist attacks. There's a lot of Islamophobia going around. Let's introduce an Islamic mutant, and like, have the bravery to say like, yeah, we just had this terrorist attack. That doesn't mean these people are monsters. Like, you are just as bad, if not worse, if you were taking out your rage about 9/11 against the Islamic people. And I think you see that with Dust, and you see, I mean, hell, just the general Genosha plotline throughout the book. Um, Another thing, I've been kind of dancing around it, but it's like I always think the Morrison's very topical. They remind me This is a terrible comparison, but it is true. They remind me of like how Simpsons used to be. It used to feel like something would happen in the news and then there'd be a Simpsons episode about it. That's how Morrison feels to me a lot, where it's like something will happen and then Morrison feels compelled to write. I think you see that with Superman and the Authority, sort of talking about the like the franchising of superheroes like in a post MCU world. Or you could even go back to with Animal Man, like yeah, the rising climate change in the world, especially in the mid to late '80s, and just how like it became so like in your face about how little people cared about the environment. So like somebody has to do something. Somebody has to step up, and it might as well be Buddy Baker.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to dive in more? Um, like any particular books or storylines that you wanted to dive into?
I mean, I could go on about JLA for about 3 hours straight. I mean, I can really talk about any more just endlessly.
I think that's what's great about them as a writer. They really do inspire that kind of passion. Um, I was going to ask you if you could expand on. You've been talking a lot to me about how much you enjoyed Seven Soldiers, and I feel like that's a book that doesn't get a lot of attention. Could you talk a little bit about that? Maybe
Yeah,
try to
yeah, of
convince
course.
people to give that one a shot.
His Seven Soldiers, quite frankly, is probably one of the more underground books, more relevant.
Surprisingly,
I think that part of it is because it's just well, it was kind of during Morrison sort of down period where they were still reeling from their belief that the Matrix stole from the Invisible. They're still kind of doing Marvel stuff. It was sort of this their their dark
it was a
period,
weird time. Yeah,
but it's also half the main characters of this book are original creations by Morrison or recreations. Like, the Shining Knight, Manhattan Guardian, the Bulleteer, Frankenstein, Seven Soldiers Frankenstein was the appearance of that character in continuity. And then even with the three pre-existing characters in this Mr. Terrific and Steel Norm, Zatanna, and Clarion, those characters were still almost reinvented to an extent.
absolutely.
And, each book has a different artist. Simone Bianchi, Fraser Irving, J.H. Williams III. Just this massive plethora of artists. So much so that upon reprint, the book jumped up $50 in price to be able to cover all the royalties you needed to pay. Like, it's really just, yeah, there's also Cameron Stewart, Ryan Sook. Let me see here. Who else? We got Freddie Williams. We have Yannick Piquet.
Hmm.
Doug Monkey. Just there's so much that just truly happens in the book. Now, I wasn't big on all of the stuff in the Omni. Like, I wasn't super impressed with Shining Knight. Honestly, I could probably go with skipping part of it upon rereads. I also really didn't like the Mr. Terrific stuff. I think I'm just too much of an idiot to understand it, but it's really just like the fourth issue is still one of the most confusing books I've ever read.
Right.
Or Mr. Miracle. Jesus, I've been saying Mr. Terrific all this time. It's Mr. Miracle, sorry.
Well,
Yeah,
and
like,
I, I think what's interesting about that cast is that it's a lot of characters that they've been seeing elsewhere too. Like Bulleteer shows up in 52. Obviously Shiloh Norman, Mr. Miracle goes on to become really important in Final Crisis. And there's another one oh, and then Frankenstein is big for a bit. But
yeah,
it's so
like
interesting, like how many threads you can tie back to that book. Like we wouldn't have the whole like Agents of Shade stuff. I don't think Justice League Dark would exist without Seven Soldiers. Maybe that's a
Um,
bad thing. With how many
Partially,
ideas it introduces.
I think it still would have happened because that was sort of the gateway to it reintroduce a lot of the Vertigo characters into
Sure.
DC. It would have happened still, but it probably wouldn't have even been a team book. It would have just been an assortment of minis that, one introduced Constantine again, one did Xanadu, Black Orchid, Rack Shade. It would have been probably it would have been what Seven Soldiers was if it never happened. If that makes sense.
Right.
Because I mean, this really was a reestablishment, and I think this was Morrison's attempt to try, honestly, to truly try and reestablish themselves again in this sort of dark period. Because imagine going up to somebody who is new to comics and saying, "Hey, you got to read this book." Where it's 7 individual miniseries that all intertwine. But get this, the main characters never meet.
Yeah, it's a team book of a team that's never formed.
I mean,
It's like,
Morrison said that they were pretty willing to keep writing Seven Soldiers. Like these are all meant to be semi ongoing pitches about these sort of different parts of DC. Like on the back of the dust jacket on the Omni, it kind of lists off like sort of each character in a single word: a knight, an escape artist, a witch, a daredevil reporter, a monster, an accident survivor, a magician. Like it's all these different characters that okay, sort of have these little supernatural links. Shining Knight's a knight from 40 years ago, Zatanna's a magician, Clarion's a witch, Frankenstein is sort of like Hellboy. Quite frankly, I would pay $100 to see Frankenstein and Hellboy team up.
that'd be a great
The,
comic.
the Bulleteer sort of approaches this a different way with being this take on body horror, with getting this entirely metallic metal body, or with Mr. Miracle, where it's this take on existentialism, with this very pure and primitive version of what Morrison was making with the Anti-Life Equation. And I mean, Manhunt Guardian is just also like kind of using New York as a basis to show supernatural linkage, like how Clarion was sort of living underneath New York in this secret witch village. Like everything in the book was done with intention. And I remember the first issue that truly sort of started to link things together was issue 2 of the Clarion mini, where you saw Manhattan Guardian's helmet from something that happened in the previous issue of that mini, and it just blew my mind. Like, not everything is blatantly reviewed, and I think it's also a book that benefits from a reread because you're trying to balance 7 simultaneous plot lines. But there's just so much truth and genius to what can happen with a writer that's not restrained by anything.
It's so fun to see, somebody at the top of their game, get an idea and just uh, really expound on it. Um, in a weird way, this is such a random pull, but it's like it's also what I really enjoyed about the story they did for the Batman Deadpool crossover last year.
Yeah.
Like, like I feel like most writers, they're like, if they were told like, okay, you got to write the Batman Deadpool crossover, they feel like, ah, jeez. I don't know. I guess they'll like shoot each other. They'll say a one-liner. I don't know. But Morrison really takes the time and is like, okay, why are these characters who are so different from each other on this level of popularity where they're starring in a book together? Maybe they're a little more similar than we give them credit for, but also it's fun to juxtapose their differences. That story, more so than the Zeb Wells one and the other issue, I thought just
Yeah.
was so like let's do this. I think that's another thing that Morrison's really eh, good at is when given something, whether it's a challenge or a task, whatever editorial mandate. I feel like they don't take it lying down. They're like very like, okay, like if that's what it's got to be, okay, let's do that. And I enjoy that in comparison to some writers, which I should say, like, granted, sometimes it's valid to be like, oh, I'm being given all these restraints, but I feel like Morrison like thrives in restraints sometimes. Like
Yeah.
what they're able to do, even given limitations, is always impressive.
Yeah, Morrison. I mean, they kind of self-limit something. Like Seven Soldiers was a test to
Right.
their capabilities. Like most writers, truthfully, even some of the greatest, not even in comics but across all forms of writing, would probably struggle to balance 7 stories and make them be connected and never make the character ever. Like it's truly a Herculean task of writing.
And make you so invested too, because that's what like the amount of times you'll be like, oh, why should I care about this stupid guy, right? Like, why should I care about the Manhattan Guardian? Why should I care about, whatever? And the fact that Morrison, again, like, takes that up as a challenge. It's like, oh, you don't care about this character? Okay, you know, let me do that. Let me show you why this character is interesting. Why this character means so much to me. And I think it always does work. I always think I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time.
No,
Um,
I'm nothing to do all night. We can be as long as you want to. I really don't.
let's go crazy. Um, but I do think, in the interest of time, I think it's kind of fun now to get into. I mean, okay, obviously, like I think we both of us would recommend everything that we've talked about. But I think it'd be kind of fun. Let's follow in Morrison's footsteps here. Let's put a challenge on ourselves. If somebody was like, I can only read one Grant Morrison book. What are you picking for them, and what's your reasoning? Like, what's the one book? It's like, oh my god, you just have to read this one. Um,
That's a
it's
really
a
good
toughie.
one.
It's a toughie.
I think I already have a pretty straight answer. Because I can eliminate some of these. Like All Star Superman, everyone recommends it. It's the end of a story.
Yeah, if you don't know anything
Um,
about Superman, it's not going to hit as hard. You
Arkham
kind of need to know about
Asylum
Superman
is a very disturbing novel. Like, I probably would have been turned off of comics if it was their first ever comic book.
for sure.
Their Batman run, it's very Morrisonian, which is
Yeah.
how crazy and batshit, no pun intended, it gets. I got their first Omni a year ago yesterday. I got it on my birthday last year. And I started reading it not too long after. And I remember when I came across that issue where it's just a whole entire fucking novel with primitive 3D art, I was like, what the hell is this? It's just such a dense and just crazy book that I can't recommend it as a first comic or the only, because you have to understand so much more.
Hmm.
Actually, comics is a very strong runner-up, but I think it would also scare somebody off Morrison because it's a book that it's like wine. It gets better with time when you can think about what happens. Like I think Action Comics was written with the intent of monthly releases to give you
Right.
time to weigh on these events and then to see it all culminate. I'm just looking over my bookshelf here. I'm looking at Final Crisis. That's an immediate no. It needs a lot of build up, and it's also very confusing. I look at Doom Patrol, and I mean, I'm only 3 issues into it, but I don't know how good it would be because it's very strong commentary and external outlook. And the thing is, with Morrison, they're amazing, but they're very intimidating in their themes and what they do. That you really have to tread carefully when recommending books to somebody.
Hmm.
Animal Man is a strong contender, and it shows a lot of strong ideas, but I think there's just more to gain from other Morrison books. I look at New X-Men. I can't do it in good conscience. That's like the only Morrison book I dislike. I look at the Multiversity, which is one of my favorite books ever, and I see it in the same way as some other books where it's so much that will scare somebody off.
Yeah, they're like, oh, we're gonna open the universe up to you, and it's like, oh, geez.
Like, it took rereads to appreciate the Just. Like, I immediately love Pax Americana. I think it's the best issue of a comic book ever. But it's so much. Like, I can imagine the epiphany someone would have understanding the sort of gimmick with Pax Americana and having to try and understand that and everything else. So, what I have sort of trimmed it down to is, in my opinion, the most underrated Morrison book ever, JLA.
Mm.
I'm getting the thick trades as they release, but I still trying to gain the Omni, but it's very genius. It's not very overwhelmingly wacky or Morrisonian. It's a very pure book, even if you're not understanding every which way of every occurrence, like you have to in Batman or Final Crisis. And it's a very persistently standing thesis that every writer ignores. The world's 7 greatest heroes are not enough to protect it. And that's the strong reason why I would have to recommend it to somebody. Because it's almost this guide on how you should approach a team in comic books. Like, I was sorting through ideas for just what to discuss before we decided on
Mhm.
doing one of these mini episodes. And it was at one point, you can look at the message in our group chat, kind of going over the oversaturation of a lot of the big teams in DC and the shortcomings that they experience in this stagnant nature they've developed. Like, that's props I have to give Brian Michael Bendis. In his short Justice League run, he introduced 4 or 5 new characters to the team. And sure, it was still cool. At its core, I think, was just the and DC Animated Universe team, but Bendis at least attempted to expand it.
Right.
That's what I love about Morrison, is that they have these true beliefs, and they look at these teams and these concepts, and they realize, okay, yeah, this is cool. Sure, like, yeah, of course, the big names: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, and Manhunt. That team will sell, but Morrison kind of looked at what they can all do and realized it's not enough. Like, you're missing someone with good supernatural knowledge. You're missing some strong versatility and just a lot of different ideas. You're missing a good person in the chair, eyes in the sky. You're missing. So Morrison approached that. They realized Sure, they'll be able to fend off a lot of threats because of just how powerful it is, but can they truly protect the world or the greater universe? And the answer is no. So, among the 7 core members, they induct Plastic Man, Orion, Big Barda, Oracle, Huntress, Steel, and Zario all onto the team, and it becomes so complete. And another part that I always have to love Morrison for is that they can balance a large team.
Oh yeah, they're good
Which
at
that's a
giving time.
shortcoming. That's a shortcoming with lots of writers. Like Dennis Camp, his Ultimates run really good. He didn't balance the cast well.
Yeah, nobody gets enough time in that book.
Like I think maybe not bi-weekly or bi-monthly or every week. That's what I mean. Maybe not that release schedule because that's a lot, especially with the sort of timeline they were going with. But even if there were annuals or quarterly issues, like I remember that's what happened after the question ended with Eddie O'Neill. He moved on to doing quarterly issues because I believe again, and Dennis Cohen was going on to Static. So Denny was doing quarterly oversized issues. That was continuing the story, and I think that would be ultimate to have these quarterly issues or even these sort of Ultimate Universe blank characters, like with Ultimate Hawkeye, to just expand. That's a shortcoming that Camp had, and that was happened with Jonathan Hickman and his Avengers run. I love his run on Avengers. I love these really large teams of heroes. Like I'm pretty sure my dream crack shot just is also four heroes. I love these large teams, but they're hard to balance. And Hickman, he appeared in anything with Wolverine in that book. I think he appeared in 3 issues as a main character. You know, like it was focusing on Iron Man and Captain America, and he did stuff with Sam and Beto because he loved those two. But he didn't focus on many of the characters. And I get there was Avengers, but he was only on that for like the first 7 issues, and it's not collected in the Omnis. So it's kind of not seen as core reading, and that becomes a shortcoming because it's just not enough. But every
Hmm.
character Morrison writes on the JLA gets time. Like, I mean, you notice that hey, Orion and Barda aren't appearing a ton, but it gets made up for because they're key components to the finale run. Everybody is doing something. Everyone's showing up consistently to different things, and that's what I think more superhero teams need to be. They need to be a Swiss Army knife as opposed to just the moneymakers. Like that's what I hate about Geoff John. Justice League team. Where's the substance? Where's the versatility? Where's the use? People blame Morrison for ruining Justice League and you get this stacked lineup. It was all John's, and it also became an issue in the Snyder and Tinian run. It was always a problem. Even with Justice League Unlimited,
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
mostly Wade writing like Mister Terrific, Superman, Batman. It's like most of those core characters. You have the Watchtower with 1,000 heroes, and nothing's being done. Even if it wasn't by Wade, just do an offshoot, Tales of the Justice League Unlimited or something. Have it be sort of modeled like JLI, where it's these 5 or 6 arcs with this small cast of characters, like 5 6 year team, and every arc is a new cast solving new problems and demonstrating that this is the Justice League in its strongest with its numbers. But it just isn't done. Most writers, I think, utilize the larger teams to sell copies. Like, I think it's probably Hick and Wolverine of the Avengers.
Hmm.
Because Wolverine sells, because Spider-Man sells, because Captain Marvel somewhat sells. It was with, like, a lot of writers do it with intent to sell. Morrison did with intent to tell. And it's just so genius.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's definitely one of their books that doesn't get enough praise. Especially I think it's a book that needed to happen. I don't think you get um I don't think you get the Bruce Timm Justice League show without that book. I mean, you certainly don't get. Mark Waid wouldn't have had the setup for Tower of Babel
Oh yeah, I
without
mean that was
Morrison's
like
run.
immediately after his run.
Yeah, it's a run that really sets a lot of good precedent, some of which is followed up on, and some, like you pointed out, isn't. No, I think that's a strong pick. For me, I'm really obsessed with how Animal Man as a book evolves with the writer. I think you read that first arc, you read Human Zoo, and it's like Morrison testing the waters, right? They're like, how much what do I want to say? Where am I going? Wait, what do I want to do with this character? And then each consecutive storyline, you get to see more of the Morrison that we'll get to know later as a writer. And I think that's so fun. And if you're willing to swallow a little bit of Morrisonian shenanigans, it really is like the best way to understand them as a writer because it's just so. I think it's the book where they bear a lot of themselves. I think you can see a lot. I would say that and probably Invisibles. It's like those two are the most like this is Morrison taking who they are as a person and putting that on the page. I think that's such a fun way to get into an author. Really finding
Yeah,
that one book that really gets into their head and like kind of lets them express themselves. It's what I come back to. I think it's a very similar situation. I wouldn't recommend it as a first, but it's like I think it's a very similar situation with All Star Superman, wherein not only is Grant talking about Superman getting older, he's talking, or they're talking about themselves getting older, right? And how they feel coming to terms with, I've done all this great work and, how much time do I have left and that sort of thing. But I think if you want to see where that all starts, you gotta go for Animal Man. You gotta see them sort of break the mold of what a DC book could be, and also do something that I think Morrison has always been really good with, and it's taking continuity and status quo that is just kind of whatever and making it work. Both Animal Man and Doom Patrol spin out of the Invasion event
yeah.
from '86, I want to say. That event's terrible. I own it all. It's garbage. It's one of the worst things you can read. But Morrison is like, well, there's something here with these aliens, and there's something here with like what happens when a traumatic event like that shakes the world, and what do we do now? And like, Animal Man talks about how like, oh, that was when I got to team up and like be one of the big shots. I got to hang out with the Justice League, but now nobody recognizes me, and like that kind of sucks, and that makes me feel self conscious. And then with the Doom Patrol, I mean, shoot, that book like kills off that event kills off most of the team as Morrison's run is starting, and then
That
so
was actually at
Morrison,
Morrison's request,
yeah,
which I think is really crazy. Not to butt in, but
no, you're absolutely right.
Morrison has a letter in number 20 saying how the previous writer was very polite in being willing to kill off or sort of severely change most of these characters. So Morrison really malleable solution.
Well, and it lets Morrison really get into that theme that I think is so central to Doom Patrol prior to Morrison, and then is like definitionally important to Doom Patrol after. Doom Patrol's always coming back, right? That's their whole thing, is that they die and then they come back. But not in like the normal comic book way of like a death of Superman or the X-Men, right? Where it's just
Yeah.
like, yep, I was dead for a bit, whatever. Like the Doom Patrol, it's always this like traumatic, it's this heart-rending, like, you know, I thought I lost you, and now now you're back, right? And I think Morrison uses that status quo to really say something. But again, I think it's what makes Animal Man work so well. Animal Man, you see Morrison having fun with like crisis stuff and like, oh, what's New Earth? What's Old Earth? What happened to the characters that got left behind and that sort of thing, which we'd see them expand on in later, like with Final Crisis and whatnot. Like, what happens when you have a universe shaking event? How does that affect the little guy? Um, yeah, I'm just so in love with Animal Man as a book. It's one of the first I read, and it's the one that really like I don't know, like convinced me of like you read like Serious House and you're like, okay, that's good, and you read All Star and you're like, that's good, but like they set out to be these very like these epic things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think what makes Animal Man so interesting is that it was the first, and it was just like, I'm just trying to write something here. I'm just trying to express myself, and then it goes on to be this profound piece.
Yeah, I mean, I always want to recommend JLA, but I tell my friends, even if I prefer JLA to recommend, get Animal Man because it's cheap. You get the compendium for $60 or the
But
reprint
yeah,
you get.
it's so accessible.
Like that is the thing with JLA. Either had to buy a $150 omnibus or wait year by year as they print $40 thick trades that isn't all Morrison. Yeah, so that is I would still recommend Animal Man. I agree with you, but in a just world where the JLA was just more widely available with Morrison's run, I would recommend that to more people.
Hmm. Yeah, what an author. We've been going now for quite a bit, and the fact that like there's still so much left to say, all right? There's so much we could get into, especially in like the grand scheme of things. Um, like they've done so much, but also like I feel like compared to some writers, like they're not even the most like prolific. Like you can find these like gaps in their writing where they don't write for a bit, but even if they're not like even if they haven't written like 1,000 issues or whatever, it's like there's such purpose, and that's why I think like a Morrison book sticks with you longer than other books. It's like it doesn't need to be the longest; it just needs to use its time to actually like affect you as a reader.
I mean, Morrison didn't really like sticking on the books for a very long time.
Yeah.
Their longest run was Batman at about 7 years. Morrison liked to lay their writing down across the medium. They enjoyed going from book to book to book to book. And I think that's really indicative of how they approach writing comics as a way to display a message or a belief or to incorporate a part of themselves into the wider scheme of reality and existence.
it, it, they ask they ask you to kind of expand your mind a little bit, and with their personal like religious and philosophical views, like that kind of makes sense to me, that it's like much like what they do in their own personal life. It's like when you read a Morrison book, you're connecting to something not just in the page, but like something beyond. Again, to go back to, I brought up Super Sons a couple times now, but like to get to the heart of what that book argues, right? The whole like superheroes is modern mythology. I never feel more like that than when I read a Morrison book. Like the heroes in a Morrison book feel so elevated. They feel um so unique and um unlike anything I've really ever like experienced. Especially, I think that's always what's funny about like Batman, right? Is that people are like, well, he's just a guy, but like in a Morrison book, like Batman doesn't feel like just a guy. He does really feel like something beyond that.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting.
it is. Yeah.
Well, I think we've reached a good point to close. As always with these bite-sized episodes, they go on way longer than I think, but that's what I kind of like about them. We get to really focus in. Are there any, I don't know, final thoughts, like last realizations, anything you want to leave people with who've been
Um,
listening with us?
I'm not sure I could without going on to 15, 20 minutes, quite frankly.
Well, whatever, say whatever case whatever you need to get off your bald Morrison head, your shiny dome, as it were.
Make use of the life you have.
Hmm.
That's not even just in relation to Morrison. That's just a generalized idea. I just turned 18, and the years have gone by as half of a finger. Life is a 5-second long, 80-decade experience of anything ever. I bed rot a lot of my days off, and I don't like doing that, but I can't get out of it. Don't do that to yourself. Live. Even if you just go for a walk, once or twice a day, do something. Get out. See something. Read something you want to read. Go out and treat yourself to a nice restaurant. Just do something before you lose the ability to do so.
I think you really hit the nail on the coffin there. It's like the the fact that you can put pen to paper and say something the way Morrison has, it just inspires you to appreciate things more. It inspires you. You can be profound in your own way too. Take inspiration from others if that helps. But like every one of us, going through life, you can be profound given the opportunity. So just go out there and take it. You got some weird little mini you want to do with a bunch of random characters, you do that. Or you know, do you want to write a book about like Superman doing the 12 labors? Like you do that because maybe that will touch somebody in a way, the way that this writing has touched us. And you'll never know until you try, right? You'll never know until you pick up that pen. Um, oh, that's beautiful. That's some profound
Thank
stuff. Well, thank you to everybody who's been listening to this. Thank you to Cheesy for joining me on this episode. I know I, for one, um, I'm just really in the mood to go read a Morrison book right now. Hopefully you are too. Uh, and for our regular listeners, hopefully this is the sign of more regular content. Maybe I don't want to say anything too specific, but I feel like maybe a transition into these more focused episodes is going to become a regular. It's kind of fun to get so much time to talk about one subject rather than trying to fit in a bunch of stuff. But we'll see. Um, so if you like what we do here, you want to see some more, give us a like, give us a subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, give us a follow. And if you want to see some live content, hopefully we will be back to streaming regularly on Twitch and doing some live comic content, talking about logging and collecting and that sort of thing. Uh, so without any delay, thank you so much for listening and keep reading comics.